final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 7036 in the name of Nigel Don on Energy Action Scotland marks its 30th anniversary. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be most grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could please press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Nigel Don to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. We're talking here about Energy Action Scotland. It started life 30 years ago as the Scottish Neighbourhood Energy Action, set up then as an independent agency with charitable status. And interestingly, its aim at the time was to create jobs to make Scotland warmer, which perhaps tells us something about the politics of the time, because now I think we would simply make it that it was there to make Scotland warmer. Unfortunately, after 30 years, Energy Action Scotland is still at it. It's still, of course, providing advice on energy saving in households, but it is also now campaigning for a recognition of fuel poverty, which certainly was something that was needed and remains. It's seeking funds for demonstration projects. It's providing training, a very useful and important function, I would suggest, and it also provides research and consultancy. I want to welcome the staff and members of the board to the chamber this evening. It would be invidious to run down by name, but I noticed the irrepressible Norrie Kerr there. And he has drawn together a team of people who work incredibly hard. The board, of course, of which I am, I think, theoretically a member, and Jackie Bailey is the other vice president from the Parliament. The board is drawn from across organisations which have an interest in this very subject, and the board members, again, provide considerable expertise and direction to what's going on. I do want to point out that fuel poverty is not one of those things that we just need to talk about. There are some definitions, and I draw that to the attention of members. The definition of fuel poverty is that a household needs to spend 10% or more of its income on its fuel bills. Quite arbitrary, but very workable. And where 20% or more of that income is required, then this is described as being in extreme fuel poverty. That does at least give us comparative numbers. When we look at the people who find themselves in fuel poverty, then it is no surprise whatsoever to anybody to discover that those with a small income, the poor, put simply, are much more likely to be in fuel poverty. That means that they are more likely to be old and to be living in old houses. And those old houses are likely to be both cold and damp. But members may note that they're not necessarily going to be small, because in many cases, of course, elderly folk have inherited or just carry on living in an older house, which was large for their family, but that's where they remain. If we look at the energy inefficient buildings that we have, then again, there are some characteristics which are really unsurprising. Old buildings, of course, were built to different standards. One might argue, if you go back far enough, that there were no standards whatsoever. They are more likely to be rented. They're more likely to be rural. And indeed, 5% of private rented dwellings fail even to reach the tolerable standard. These 14,000 homes account for 20% of the total below tolerable standard housing stock. And tolerable standard is a property which is condemned, essentially. Something that is actually below the standard which the Scottish Government regard as acceptable. One other characteristic that's significant in the context of what Energy Action Scotland are trying to do is that 71% of dwellings in an urban setting have a good energy rating, but only 32% of those in rural areas. So we find more of these dwellings in places where it's actually difficult to deal with them, a subject to which I shall return. I also note in passing, of course, that those who live in rural communities are more likely to be off gas, and therefore going to be spending more for the same amount of heat. And I would also note in passing that there is a problem with energy performance certificates, because what they do is they tell you what the property is actually going, how much heat essentially it's going to lose, but they use the heat that it's going to lose under normal circumstances as a surrogate for what that cost is going to be. But of course, if it's in a rural place where you're going to be spending your money on oil rather than gas, then actually your heating costs are going to be proportionately greater. What kind of solutions do folk have? Well, the obvious ones of insulation. I think people will know their way around this. Can we provide a better boiler? Well, we need to be careful because providing the heat stays in the building, it doesn't matter quite what kind of boiler you've got. The waste from a boiler is the waste that goes up the flue stack. And therefore, as long as the flue is as cold as it sensibly can be and you do whatever you can to condense water vapour, actually any boiler is efficient as any other if those numbers are the same. Scottish Housing Condition Survey, however, tells me that the 732,000 dwellings in private tenure, which have spent some £2 billion in the 3 years between 2009-11, have not managed to do anything at all to the average quality and condition of those houses. What that demonstrates is that we actually have to spend quite a lot of money just to stand still. Now, there are many other issues that I could address, and I'm sure members will, but I'd like to, in the last moments, Presiding Officer, consider what the real problems are in the way in which we're actually trying to deal with them, and then whether or not we need to be perhaps a little bit more radical. The major difficulty that we have in addressing poorly insulated, thermally working houses is that we're dealing with them one at a time in the rural context. And that's just extraordinarily inefficient, not in thermal terms, but in actually getting somebody there to look at it, to assess what needs to be done, then getting one person to come and do the following job, somebody else to come and do something else. As a piece of engineering, it's incredibly inefficient. I think it is altogether very likely that government money needs to be spent in a slightly different direction. Because that is, in organisational terms, so inefficient, I wonder whether we actually need to move to a position where we will insist that government money or public money is spent one terrace at a time, or one road at a time, or one town at a time, or at the very least one stairwell at a time, so that we get the efficiencies of actually having staff and thinkers and engineers there doing one job over a substantial number of properties rather than diverting their effort over a huge number of different places, which inevitably they deal with very inefficiently. I'm sure those are things that other members may want to discuss. Time prevents me from carrying on with the many other issues that we might comment on. Once again, can I welcome members of the staff along? I'm sure my colleague Jackie Bailey will want to say something about the reception, which is shortly to follow. But I note in finishing, Presiding Officers, I'm sure you want me to do, that the problem hasn't gone away. 30 years ago, I'm sure everybody hoped that in 30 years' time we would have cracked it. I think it's fair to say technically we probably have. But in terms of actually how we deal with it, there's a very long way yet to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn to the open debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, and I call Liam MacArthur to be followed by Mike Mackenzie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I start with an apology to all of the Chamber that as a result of a rescheduled corporate body meeting, I will have to depart early. But can I also congratulate Nigel Don on his motion securing the debate on his role as Honorary Vice President and the other Honorary Vice President for Receptions, Jackie Bailey. Could I also congratulate Energy Action Scotland on this, the 30th anniversary of their tireless campaigning on the issue of fuel poverty. I think the figures that Nigel Don referred to should not in any way be seen as a mark of failure on their part. I think they've been absolutely 100% successful in getting this issue up to the top of the political agenda, right across the board, across different administrations, and watching tailored approaches. And I was very interested by Nigel Don's reference to the area-based approach, which I think we would all agree needs to form more of a part of the approach that we take. The Energy Action Scotland briefing for today's debate highlighted some of the characteristics of where fuel poverty is most prevalent, and I won't rehearse those. None of them are particularly surprising, but they do indicate particular problems in rural areas such as the ones I represent, Orkney. We take no pride at all in being top of the list in terms of fuel poverty in this country, second, I think, only to the Western Isles. It's not difficult to understand why, with longer, harsher winters, more hard-to-heat properties, being off the gas grid, high fuel costs and lower incomes. That's not to say that there hasn't been a concerted effort and fairly innovative approaches being taken to trying to deal with this. A pilot initiative in Westray, for example, looking at using a variety of options to treat different hard-to-heat properties. There's still hope that I think we can be found to harness the renewables generation to supply fuel-pool households, possibly also easing some of the grid constraints locally. And Orkney Housing Association, I think, has got a decent track record in innovation in this area. They've attracted funding through Carol and the Energy Action Scotland's Affordable Warmth Fund, which allowed them to fund a particular position within the organisation, which has allowed them to carry out survey work, provide advice to householders, as well as undertake a range of measures which I think have helped alleviate the problems for many of their tenants. But I think as a move to renewable technologies was the right approach to take. It has presented some difficulties. I know from complaints from my own constituents that as a result, costs of installations can be higher and contributions that are required are therefore higher. That bills afterwards tend to go up. Now, part of this may be the result of fuel costs going up, but it's also, I think, a product of heating perhaps more of the home. And actually, there's some uncertainty about the operation of some of these systems. And so I think there's some challenges within that about whether or not we're giving enough attention to what bills are likely to be after the installation of measures and whether there's adequate aftercare being provided. Both Energy Action Scotland and the Scottish Fuel Poverty Forum have estimated the levels of investment to be around 200 million per year over the 10 years dating back to 2006. At the moment, that is not being put in sufficiently. The amount that is suggested is around 79 million secured funding under HEAPS. And I think this is what has me slightly concerned about the proposal we've heard from Ed Miliband in terms of a price freeze, which has excited a great deal of attention. There is an issue there as to whether or not we will see spikes in bills before the freeze comes into effect, or actually a diminution of the investment and sort of measures that will give us a long-term solution to this issue. I think more interestingly still, it's exposed some divisions within the Scottish Government about how to respond to this, both arguing for the proposal, against the proposal, and then suggesting it's a matter for the Energy Commission. But, Deputy Presiding Officer, let me conclude by congratulating Nigel Don again on securing his debate on the 30th anniversary of Energy Action Scotland, with just over 3 years to go to the 2016 deadline. It's opportune for us to restate our commitment and redouble our efforts to end fuel poverty. In one of my first debates as the party's energy spokesman back in 2008, I called for the re-establishment of the Independent Fuel Poverty Advisory Forum. I'm delighted to say that call was successful. I also called for a collaborative effort to do Norman Kerr out of a job by achieving our goal of ending fuel poverty. Worryingly, Norrie, who sits in the chamber this evening, is as safe in his post today as he was 5 years ago. This is simply not acceptable, and we must do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call Mike Mackenzie to be followed by Murdo Fraser.
Presiding Officer, fuel poverty is a measure that captures a group of other related problems: low incomes, poor insulation, high fuel prices, and in the Highlands and Islands, associated fuel transport costs. It's important also because it tells us something about inequality in our society and something also about geographical inequality across the UK. Fuel poverty is running at an unacceptable level of over 20% across the UK, but at the much higher level of 30% across Scotland. And as Liam MacArthur has indicated, the truly shocking level of 50% on Scotland's islands. I will leave members to decide themselves whether this represents a union dividend or a union deficit. And members will know that most powers relating to energy are reserved to Westminster. Fuel poverty is therefore largely a failure of Westminster policy and not that of the Scottish Government. But that's not to suggest that the Scottish Government can do nothing or is doing nothing about fuel poverty. But it's important to place the matter in its proper context. And that's why I was glad to hear Ed Miliband suggest that if his party is elected to government, he hopes to do something to deal with fuel poverty. I'm glad he recognises the problem of fuel poverty, even if I'm concerned that the method that he proposes may not work and may have unintended consequences. Price controls are a blunt and unwieldy instrument which may do more harm than good, and they seem to carry more than a whiff of populism and political opportunism. I prefer the more careful method that the Scottish Government is following, of setting up an expert commission and of listening carefully to what that commission says. I also prefer the approach the Scottish Government is following of providing help to insulate homes, because this will provide long-term energy savings and long-term cost savings. There may be other policy solutions. If we had full control over energy policy, we would, for example, have the opportunity of perhaps introducing progressive fuel charging, perhaps offering discounted rates for prepayment meters, perhaps offering a lower wind tariff or island tariff currently being talked about on Orkney and Shetland, using renewable energy power currently constrained by the lack of grid infrastructure. I look forward to hearing the suggestions put forward by the Expert Commission on Energy. There are technical challenges too to be overcome. The methodology used across the UK to measure home energy efficiency, the SAP calculation, is in itself flawed and has given rise to the popularity, and I think again Liam MacArthur touched on this, of what has become known as eco-bling, technologies of dubious benefit which are appended to our buildings only in order to comply with this calculation. Until we have a better understanding of how we can deal with the technological challenge of dealing with fuel poverty, it may be a mistake to throw money at the problem. We are still learning how to deal with the profound difficulties of dealing with our older housing stock. Some housing associations are concerned that some of the work done to meet current standards will have to be redone to meet forthcoming standards. In a time when there are severe challenges to our financial resources, we need to make sure that every penny is spent wisely. Much of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked. We've insulated around 60% of accessible loft spaces. We've insulated around 60% of cavity walls. Presiding Officer, in these difficult times, there are unfortunately no silver bullets when it comes to dealing with fuel poverties. In the long run, it's a careful approach which closely examines and learns from the effectiveness of both policy measures and technical measures that will deliver the solutions.
Many thanks. Murdo Fraser, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Can I congratulate Nigel Don on securing this debate and thank him for his very thoughtful contribution in opening it. It's some slight contrast to the rather splendidly partisan contribution we just had from Mike Mackenzie. And I agree with Nigel Don and all the speakers that we should pay tribute to Energy Action Scotland for all their work over the past 30 years. As convener of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee, Norrie Kerr and Elizabeth Gore, indeed their colleagues, are regular visitors to the committee and very welcome in addition with their insights into this particular area of public policy. A number of members have referred to the 2016 targets to eliminate fuel poverty. That is the sort of target that civil servants would describe as challenging, given the situation we are now in, and with levels of fuel poverty in Scotland actually on the increase, above 30%, perhaps approaching even 40%. The challenge is even greater today than it has been in the past. I think there are three elements to fuel poverty. The question of income levels generally, the question of fuel costs, and the question of levels of efficiency. I'm not going to spend much time this evening discussing the first. That's a much broader debate about income levels in the economy. But I think in relation to the second, of fuel costs, we have seen a rise in wholesale fuel costs in recent years. That's partly due to a rise in the cost of energy, mainly from fossil fuels, but also as a result of the green levies that we all pay on our electricity tariff. If we are going to tackle fuel poverty, we need to have lower cost energy, but we need to square that with the ambitious targets we've set for climate change. Liam MacArthur mentioned Ed Miliband's magic solution. I'm not going to spend a lot of time attacking that. I'll leave that to my good friend Fergus Ewing, who's much better at it than I am. But I'm not sure that's the solution because, of course, that's trying to rig the market, and all the energy companies would do in advance of that is hike their prices and get the benefit of even higher prices for a longer time. Incidentally, it does nothing for those of us like myself who live in a semi-rural situation and who are therefore off-grid, and therefore fixing the prices don't actually help us. I'll be delighted to take an intervention.
Mike Mackenzie.
Would you agree with me, Mr Fraser, that the Green Deal is not really a deal which will at all help the rural areas that you describe, largely because rural properties will have great difficulty in meeting the golden rule?
Murdo Fraser.
No, I think that's an unduly pessimistic view from Mr Mackenzie on the Green Deal. I was privileged to host an event in Parliament a few weeks ago for the Green Deal, and there's a great deal of interest in that from people from all parts of Scotland, and perhaps if Mr Mackenzie had come along, he would have seen that for himself. But in terms of energy prices, we need to be aware renewable energy, so beloved by many people in this chamber, is expensive energy. We are paying a high cost for it. Look at the States, look at the exploitation of shale gas, which has reduced wholesale energy costs by some 50% and saved carbon at the same time. We need to be focused on lower cost sources of energy. But the other element of this is the question of energy efficiency, and Nigel Don mentioned this in his comments. Energy Action Scotland has calculated that we need £200 million per annum for energy efficiency measures if we're going to make some progress. We need to get a share of that from the energy companies. Are we getting that at the moment? I don't think we know. We don't have that information. And the Scottish Government needs to make sure that they are providing that if the amount of money they're putting in, I think it's £79 million in the current budget, is going to be matched by the private sector. Who's getting that money? Is it going to the right people? Is it going to those in hard-to-reach households? And of course, are we providing enough from the public sector? In the current draft budget, the Scottish Government has made the decision to reallocate £10 million from the fuel poverty budget elsewhere. Does that make sense if this is the priority that we want it to be? I'm not sure it does. Deputy Presiding Officer, it's issues like this which Energy Action Scotland have helped put on the agenda. They are very valuable. I would hope that in 30 years' time we won't still need them, but if we do, I hope they continue to do their excellent work.
Many thanks. Stuart Stevenson, to be followed by Mary Fee.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I thank Nigel Don for the opportunity to debate this important subject. It's not often that the Chamber comes together in unanimity with the objective of increasing unemployment in Scotland, but we all want to see Norrie and the rest of his group entirely superfluous and unrequired and out of work. However, I think we should weed no tears if we succeed in that, because I think a formidable campaigner and team like his, there are plenty of other opportunities which I'm sure they would deploy their skills to focus on. So, Presiding Officer, for rural dwellers like those that I represent, the creation of Energy Action Scotland from its roots 30 years ago is something that focuses on key rural issues, looking for effective solutions, hounding government, searching for private investment. This national charity is one which we should all hold dear to our hearts in the present environment. Because, of course, when we address fuel poverty, we also address employment and we address the issue of climate change. In my constituency, as elsewhere, about 31% of rural dwellers are spending more than 10% of their income on fuel alone. Very largely, like my own situation, living in off-grid circumstances. And in a country as wealthy as we are, that really is a pretty unacceptable situation. The government is quite clear in the financial commitments it's making to deal with this, some £250 million allocated to fuel poverty and energy efficiency in the current spending period. And that's a good step in the right direction. Not so sure that colleagues south of the border, faced with a less pressing problem from geography, of course, are as keen on supporting, in particular, low-income families. Now, the Minister, from whom we'll hear at the end of the debate, has previously assured me that in an independent Scotland we'd have an expert committee look at energy regulation, and I will continue to work to allow her that opportunity to do so. Now, energy efficiency, of course, is one of these really rather simple things. Home insulation has been referred to by a number of members already, and I must say, for us, we've been lucky enough to be able to get our loft insulation from 200 millimetres up to 600 millimetres. We're just going into the first winter where we'll get the full benefit. And actually, it's been so effective already that the outside meter on our oil tank, my wife thought it had stopped working. She sent me to get the ladder to go and look in the top of the tank and see what the actual level of fuel was, because she felt it should be much lower than the meter was saying it was. The meter was correct. So that quite simple intervention has made, for us, quite a dramatic difference, as it will do for others. So I hope that the insulation programme continues to offer people in rural areas in particular the opportunity to save on their energy. I think that it's part of the issues of living in a rural setting that you pay more for your fuel. I hope that Mike Weir, my MP colleague down in Westminster, is successful in persuading those down there that we should advance winter fuel payments so that those less well off in rural settings can buy fuel earlier in the year when A, it's cheaper, and B, more easy to deliver when there isn't snow on the ground that prevents the lorries getting to your fuel tank. Let me just close, Presiding Officer, by perhaps gently chiding my colleague Murdo Fraser. I'm not sure that green energy is more expensive than others. It certainly is reflected in above-the-line costs that appear in budgets, but the tax breaks that are given to other forms of energy, in particular nuclear, are below the line, and it's generally accepted that green energy is cheaper, for example, than nuclear. Presiding Officer, an excellent debate.
Many thanks. I now call Mary Fee to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you too to Nigel Don for bringing the members' debate to the Chamber today. The motion pays tribute to Energy Action Scotland on achieving a remarkable milestone of 30 years. And in the current economic climate, we need such organisations to help reduce the cost of heating homes and promote energy efficiency. And with fuel poverty figures stagnant over recent years and the Scottish Government's pledge to eradicate fuel poverty where practicable only a few years away, we have to be concerned that not enough action is being taken. The Sustainable Housing Strategy is to be welcomed. However, we must ensure that the help offered goes to those that desperately need the assistance. And while the Scottish Government has invested almost £150 million on fuel poverty and energy efficiency programmes since 2009-10 and 2011-12, it's estimated the net gain to households was £700 million and a saving of 300 million tonnes of CO2. And since 2008, more than 540,000 have received free or subsidised cavity wall or loft insulation measures through the carbon emission reduction targets. And the Scottish House Condition Survey showed that 125,000 homes upgraded their boiler in the year leading up to the strategy. I have, however, had concerns raised to me about the efficiency and the sustainability of the retrofit programme and the buy-in to that programme and whether or not it will actually achieve the aims. And fuel poverty cannot be looked at in isolation. We also need to take into account climate change targets. And while progress has been made, we are still well short of the mark. We have annual targets which must be achieved each year until 2020. However, these targets have not been met, and indeed the emissions from 2009-10 increased by 5.8%, or 2% when you take into account the EU emissions trading system. And emissions from both the residential and the transport sector were actually higher in 2010 than they were in 1990. And an important factor in fuel poverty is, as has been mentioned before, rural poverty. And I recently met with Calor Gas, who mostly cover off-grid and rural areas. And I was quite alarmed and surprised at some of the information that they gave me, because they told me that the UK energy efficiency schemes are continuing to fail our rural communities. And the UK government's energy company obligation is in the hands of the big six, and their hands are tied, and there is very little help that they can offer, or indeed very little coverage that they have in rural areas. And funding that's been earmarked for rural areas, the carbon saving community obligation, is for settlements with a population size under 10,000 and will unlikely cater for small communities. And previous schemes such as CERT and CESP targeted at rural areas were not spent, and there is a danger of history repeating itself if lessons have not been learnt. And finally, Presiding Officer, in considering fuel poverty, we must also take into account child poverty. The link between the two is inextricable and cannot be looked at in isolation. And child poverty statistics still remain too high, and too many of our children are both fuel and food poor. and that's not a statistic that anyone in this chamber should be proud of in 2013. However, I do want to finish on a positive note and once again pay tribute to Energy Action Scotland on achieving their marvellous 30-year milestone. Thank you.
Many thanks. And before I call the Minister, Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much, and can I apologise to you and the Chamber Presiding Officer for missing the start of Nigel Don's excellent contribution. I was in a car park called the Forth Road Bridge and nothing was moving very fast at all. Can I, like others, join you in congratulating Nigel in securing this slot? I do have to declare an interest. I've already been outed as one of the 2 honorary Vice Presidents. I should warn Nigel, though, that the previous honorary vice presidents, certainly on the SNP side, have ended up becoming ministers. Indeed, his predecessor, I believe, was Alex Neil. He didn't last long before he enjoyed ministerial office, so I look forward to that happening to you too. But like others, could I pay enormous tribute to the work of Energy Action Scotland? They are a superb organisation, and I think what is true is that has united the Chamber in praise for them. Whether it's about getting their voice heard on the key issues of fuel poverty, whether it's about making a difference with keeping warm, keeping well leaflets for the benefit of people struggling to keep warm at home, distributed through GP practices, or whether it's their strategic affordable warmth fund where they're helping 6 rural housing associations, they are making a huge difference in communities across Scotland. But they don't just talk about it, they're interested in developing solutions too. Solutions that try to deal with the problem of cold, damp and expensive to heat homes. They sit on the Scottish Fuel Poverty Forum, and I'm sure that they will be a critical friend to the Minister because they want to strive to achieve even more. Their members include housing associations, local government, fuel utilities, advice agencies, manufacturers, installation installers. The list is endless. And as you've already heard, I am sponsoring an event to which you are all invited later on this evening as Honorary Vice President, which is the Energy Action Scotland Business Supporters Group. So I do hope to see you all there. It's at this point that my kind of consensual tone ends, and I'm sorry about that. You know, we've spent last week debating the cost of living. I represent probably some of the poorest communities in Scotland. Fuel poverty stands at 900,000 households. That's not people, that's households. That's 1 in 3, and frankly, that is a national scandal. Now, we've seen huge fluctuations in price, and prices are very quick to go up, extremely slow to ever reduce. But I am very proud that the Scottish Parliament did set an ambitious target. We all supported it. We didn't say at the time we didn't have enough powers. Every single party in this place supported the pledge to end fuel poverty by 2016. Now, we're 3 years away. We've got a huge challenge. I asked Cabinet Secretaries, I asked Ministers, Margaret McDougall asked John Swinney at the recent, was it the Energy Committee? Yeah, okay. You know, I've spent time in here, I've asked Margaret Burgess. Nobody can tell us. Now, either that's because they don't think we should know, but I actually think we should be honest about the challenge we face. The budget at one stage, I think it was 2010-11, was down as low as 40 million at the start of the budget year. It's now up to 79, but dropped again. I think it was 74, but Murdo seems to think 10 million has been whipped away. There was an announcement of a helpline. Now, forgive me, I'm not sure, is that a new helpline or is that the existing one? Because if we're going to strain every sinew to do this, then we really shouldn't be reheating old announcements. We really shouldn't. I'm much more interested in talking about the solutions. I am much more interested in looking at how we get beyond the poverty of ambition expressed by Mike McKenzie, because we did agree the pledge is not enough to then blame somebody else. Ed Miliband's price freeze is practical. It helps people that are struggling. The SNP's response has been a bit like a yo-yo. Mike Weir says no, Angela Constance in here says, well, maybe, let's see the detail, and then we have Fergus Ewing. Not just no, but the lights are going to go out. I mean, when are we going to get serious about this? And now it's parked with the Commission. I don't know when this Commission's going to report. I don't know what it's going to say, but I can tell you that people are suffering now, and I hope Energy Action Scotland are still around to push us all to go a damn sight further than they already have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I now invite Margaret Burgess to respond to the debate? Minister, you have 7 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'll also start by thanking Nigel Don for proposing this motion, and to all the members for their contributions. But as Scotland's only national fuel poverty voluntary organisation, Energy Action Scotland plays a vital role in tackling fuel poverty in Scotland, bringing together a wide range of stakeholders, and we heard that a moment ago from Jackie Bailey. And Energy Action Scotland is well respected by all of those working in the sector, and in this, the year in which Energy Action Scotland marks its 30th anniversary, I welcome the opportunity to reconfirm the Scottish Government's commitment to continuing to support Energy Action Scotland in its work to tackle fuel poverty and to ensure that Scotland's people can live in warm homes that are affordable to heat. And a few moments ago, I think Norrie Kerr has been mentioned a lot in the chamber today, but Jackie Bailey mentioned that he sits on as Vice Chair of the Fuel Poverty Forum, and through this role, Energy Action Scotland have made a valuable contribution to setting the direction of the Scottish Government's funding on fuel poverty. Energy Action Scotland has been fully involved in shaping our HEAPS programme and plays an important ongoing role in ensuring that outcomes are delivered. And fuel poverty has come a long way over the last 30 years, from a time when fuel poverty was largely unknown to today, when it's actually recognised in the Oxford English Dictionary, and that's not something we should be proud of. And it gives me little comfort as a minister responsible for fuel poverty that 684,000 households in Scotland were in fuel poverty in October 2011. And that was an increase of 26,000 from 2010, but without the improvements in the energy efficiency of homes and household incomes, the overall rate would have been around 770,000 households. And energy efficiency, while a sustainable solution, will never be a solution to fuel poverty, a total solution. We need the full powers of independence to tackle all the causes of fuel poverty, household energy efficiency, income and prices, so Scotland can be a beacon of progressive action to tackle fuel poverty and maintain household incomes. And I think, a few moments ago, Jackie Bailey talked about price freeze. That's something the Scottish Government cannot do. We have no control over the prices of energy. And I think everyone in this chamber has agreed, I'll take an intervention in a moment, that energy costs are a huge part of fuel poverty, the rising prices of energy we have no control over.
Fraser.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. I'm a little bit confused by what the Minister has just said. My understanding was that the SNP's position was that in the event of independence, they'd want to retain the single UK energy market so that the subsidies currently paid by 60 million consumers across the UK will continue to come to support Scotland's renewable industry sector. Is the Minister now saying that that is no longer SNP policy?
Minister?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't say that wasn't SNP policy. What I said was that we had to look at the fuel prices, the rising costs of fuel prices, and that's certainly why we've got the Commission set up to look at that, as well as all the other aspects of fuel prices. But yes, we want to continue with our renewable energy programme.
Jackie Bailey.
It's about the Commission. I regret I missed the announcement. It seemed to have been hurried out. Can you tell me what the remit of the Commission is and when it will report?
Minister.
The remit of the Commission is to how an independent Scotland can promote fairer, more affordable energy prices, the role of the Scottish regulator in addressing fuel poverty, delivering affordability, a security of supply and environmental sustainability, and that's what the Commission is looking at. The precise date I will write to the member if we have a date set for when that Commission will report, and I'll certainly write to the member on that. But I also want to say that tackling fuel poverty is an absolute priority for this government. And we have a statutory duty, which we've been reminded of by a number of speakers, to ensure as far as reasonably practical that people are not living in fuel poverty in Scotland by November 2016. And we are doing everything within our limited powers to achieve this. We know that it's a vital social issue affecting families across Scotland, and we've taken action to tackle it. Over the last 3 years, the Scottish Government has invested over £220 million in a raft of fuel poverty and energy efficiency programmes. And our budget, just for the avoidance of doubt, in this current year is £74 million. And we have secured £79 million funding for the next 2 years. And in contrast, I think we have to look at this. Westminster has cut its fuel poverty funding, and from the 1st of April this year, there is no longer any UK taxpayer-funded fuel poverty programmes in England, the only country in the UK not to have government-backed support on this important issue. And we know that the most sustainable way to tackle fuel poverty is by raising the energy efficiency of homes. And I've mentioned Energy Action Scotland in their role as a member of the Fuel Poverty Forum have helped shape the new HEAPS programme. And this programme is being used to lever in additional money from the ECO and is offering a package of support to all of those struggling to pay their energy bills and keep their homes warm. And I think we should make it clear that the pilots in the HEAPS programme, or as it was then known as the National Retrofit Programme, indicated that we were levering in more than 2 to 1 for every pound put in of the Scottish Government funding. And that's important, and that's why we hope to achieve the £200 million figure that's been talked about. And £46 million of the funding announced is for area-based schemes, which I think is very much what I think Nigel Don was alluding to. It is about area-based schemes where there are fuel poverty areas, and it can be tackled area by area as opposed to bit by bit. And this was recommended by the Fuel Poverty Forum. The predicted leverage of ECO, as I've said, is £130 million and also £30 million of landlord funding. We've got memorandum of understanding to deliver the affordable warmth scheme signed with 3 suppliers to maximise ECO in Scotland. We've also a 2-year extension worth £32 million announced to the Energy Assistance Package starting from the 1st of April 2013. And to August 2013, around 2010 referrals were made to this scheme, with over 700 completed installations. And I'll just at this point say a bit about the hotline that was promoted. It's not about reinventing and saying something again. It's about getting people, every time the hotline is promoted, more people contact the advice centres and more people go onto the programme. It's about reaching out to as many people in Scotland, particularly as we're approaching winter, to make sure that they've got a trusted source that they can contact to find out about the energy efficiency measures that they could be eligible for. And that's why I think I'll take a further
Jackie Bailey.
Very much to the Minister for taking the intervention. I couldn't agree more with what she's saying about raising awareness, but would she accept that it was presented as something new and actually it's an existing helpline?
Minister.
Well, I don't think it was presented as something new. And in some ways, it may well be that the way that the advert is going, there'll be a television advert with it as well, because it's about attracting people. It's getting people to get in there, pick up that phone and make the phone call. And I'm not going to get into a debate whether maybe somebody thinks it's new or old. If somebody for the first time, because of seeing that advert or the promotion we've done, phones up that helpline and gets support, then that's what it's all about, and it's been successful. So I'll just finish up by saying that we're tackling fuel poverty from every angle that we can, and above all, we'll not take away vital support from our most vulnerable citizens while the battle to end fuel poverty is not yet won. And without the work of organisations such as Energy Action Scotland, this fight would be much more difficult. Tackling fuel poverty is and will continue to be a priority for me and for the Scottish Government.
Many thanks. That concludes Nigel Don's debate, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.